My stepmom tried to control my life, forced me to choose between her and my best friend, and when I refused, she kicked me out. I'm a 27-year-old guy, and I'd say the most pivotal moment of my childhood was the loss of my mother, a few years after. Her passing, my father remarried, and that's when my stepmother came into the picture. My father, usually reserved and diligent, seemed determined to bring stability to our family life, but my stepmother introduced a completely different atmosphere. From the start, I felt like she saw me as a burden rather than her son, rarely using my name and instead calling me "Hey you" or "the boy," as if I wasn't truly part of the family. During that challenging period, I met my best friend when we were both 9. We bonded over a simple game of tag at school, and right from the beginning, her humor and kindness shone brightly. We lived on neighboring streets, which meant we spent hours together after school, tackling homework or riding bikes around the neighborhood. She was my rock, especially during the confusion of losing my mom and adjusting to my new home life. Whenever my stepmom's harsh comments got to me, it was my friend who cheered me up with jokes or snacks she'd sneak from her own kitchen. She became my sanctuary in a world that felt increasingly unstable. From the beginning, my stepmother didn't hide her disdain for my friend. Perhaps she recognized how important my friend was to me, someone who boosted my confidence when I needed it most. My stepmom would make comments like, "Shouldn't you be doing your chores instead of hanging out with her?" Or, "Don't depend on her. You need to do things by yourself." My father, for his part, stayed neutral. He was probably glad I had someone to talk to, but he didn't take a stand against his wife. I tried to ignore her negativity, hoping that one day she'd understand the importance of my friendship. But as I got older, her resentment only grew. My friend and I remained close through middle school and high school, helping each other with school projects and supporting one another through teenage heartbreaks and drama. She was the type of friend who would sneak me homemade pie if I had a bad day, or drag me out to watch the sunset when I was feeling down. My stepmother would see these gestures and roll her eyes, more than once telling me, "That girl is just a distraction." Occasionally, she'd even scold me for spending time at my friend's house, accusing me of neglecting family duties. When I became an adult, my father's health began to decline, and the family business, where my stepmom held a managerial role, became her new focus. She grew more demanding, wanting me to assist in the afternoons without ever recognizing the work I was already putting in, including a part-time job I managed on the side. If I was even 5 minutes late, she would snap at me if I made plans. With my friend, her disapproval was evident. Over time, the look she gave me whenever I mentioned my best friend became filled with open hostility. One evening, after I'd gone out to the movies with my friend, my stepmother cornered me in the living room, her anger ready to spill over. She demanded, "Why do you waste so much time with that girl? She's a bad influence, I can feel it." My anger started to boil. "How is she a bad influence?" I asked, trying to stay composed. My stepmother didn't offer any solid reasons, just a vague rant about not focusing on real life. It was ridiculous. My friend was the one who encouraged me to study and build a stable future, not the other way around. From that moment on, my stepmother's stance became even more rigid. She wanted me to completely sever ties with my best friend. No phone calls, no visits, and no mention of her name. I was stunned. We'd been friends for 15 years, and she'd only ever been supportive of me. Yet my stepmother seemed determined to erase her from my life, coming up with the flimsiest excuses. The entitlement in her tone was chilling, as if she truly believed she had the power to control my relationships. When I tried to reason with her, she made nonsensical claims. "She's undermining your loyalty to this household," or "She's turning you against me." Each accusation became more ridiculous than the last. I pointed out that my best friend had never spoken ill of my stepmother. In fact, she often encouraged me to maintain peace at home. But logic was lost on my stepmother. She insisted my friend was sneaky or too forward, filling my head with nonsense. I turned to my father for support, hoping he would back me up. But he just sighed heavily, looking down, muttering that he wanted to keep the peace. Essentially, he left me to deal with it alone, unwilling to confront his wife. That hurt deeply. I realized I had no true ally in my own home. When my friend heard about the situation, she was furious. She offered to come over and talk things through, but I knew that would only escalate the drama. I reassured her that I wasn't going to give in to my stepmother's demands, no matter what threats she made. And soon enough, the threats came. My stepmother cornered me in the kitchen, her arms crossed and her voice dripping with malice. "You're done seeing that girl, or I'll have your father cut off your living expenses. You can find somewhere else to live if you won't follow my rules." My blood boiled at her ultimatum. There was no moral high ground here. This was pure manipulation. My father's house was legally half his and half hers, yet she felt entitled to dictate who I could or couldn't see. I refused. I'm not cutting off someone who's been my best friend since childhood. She hasn't done anything wrong. My stepmother's face twisted with anger, her lips curling into a sneer. You'll regret this, she hissed, turning sharply and storming away. That night, the tension in the house was suffocating. She slammed pots and pans around, muttering insults under her breath whenever I walked by. My father sat quietly, eyes glued to the TV, pretending not to notice the tension that filled the room. The next week, my stepmother took things even further. She tried to rummage through my phone, hoping to find text messages or calls with my friend to prove she was a bad influence. I caught her going through my things in my room, flipping through my phone, trying to find something to use against her. I quickly grabbed my phone from her hands, furious, and told her to respect my privacy. She shot back, "Not under my roof. You don't get to have secrets." I retorted that it was my father's house too, not just hers, but the argument quickly spiraled into a shouting match, ending with her storming out and slamming the door. Next, she started spreading false rumors to a few relatives, telling them that my best friend was influencing me badly and that we were involved in something shady. Some of my more gullible relatives began to give me strange looks, even calling me to ask if my friend had problems or if she was trouble. I had to constantly defend her, but the damage was already done. My stepmom's lies sowed confusion among the extended family, leaving me frustrated and angry. Throughout all of this, my best friend remained my rock. She texted me encouraging messages and even invited me to dinner at her house, where her parents, who welcomed me like one of their own, would tell me how proud they were of our strong friendship. Their warmth gave me the strength to stand firm against my stepmom's hostility. I promised myself I wouldn't let her destroy something so important to me. I started exploring options for getting out, looking for a small room to rent or considering shared apartments, but I was careful about my finances and the timing. Meanwhile, the tension at home only escalated. Every time I walked into that house, my stepmother's glare followed me as if my friendship was a personal attack on her. She even started intercepting phone calls, eavesdropping on my conversations to hear if it was my friend on the other end. It felt like she was stalking me. Then, the inevitable confrontation happened. It was a Saturday morning, and I had just returned home after spending the night at my best friend's place, where we'd watched movies and talked about old memories. As soon as I walked through, "The door?" My stepmom pounced, her arms crossed, demanding that I come into the living room. My father was already sitting there with a resigned look on his face, like he had been forced to listen to her rehearsed speech. She wasted no time saying, "I've had enough. Either you stop seeing that girl altogether, or you pack your things and leave." My father murmured something about finding a compromise, but she silenced him, ordering him to stay out of it. My heart raced as I asked her once again what her real issue was. She went on and on about how my friend was disrespectful, too opinionated, and pulling me away from my responsibilities. I held my tongue, trying to stay calm, but when she repeated that my friend was a bad influence and ruining the family, I couldn't hold back anymore. I raised my voice and told her that she had no right to condemn someone she barely knew, let alone demand I cut ties with them. I went on to list all the ways my best friend had helped me over the years, supporting me academically, comforting me when I was grieving, guiding me through personal dilemmas, things my stepmom had never bothered to do. But she dismissed it all as trivial. My father just sat there, helpless, staring at the floor, not even trying to intervene. She issued her final ultimatum. "If you walk out that door to see her again, don't bother coming back." A heavy silence settled in, the weight of her words pressing down on me. But strangely, they also brought clarity. I suddenly understood. I didn't fear her anymore. I felt a sharp, decisive clarity. If staying meant enduring her control and sacrificing my friendship, I wanted no part in it. I turned to my father, hoping to find some sign of support. Instead, he lowered his gaze and mumbled, "Son, try to understand her side." My heart broke as I realized there would be no help from him. My stepmom's smirk was full of triumph. She thought she had won. She assumed I would bend and stay to avoid being kicked out. She had misjudged me, though. My love and loyalty to my best friend had always outweighed any fear she could impose. I walked to my room, grabbed a few essentials, and threw them into a duffel bag. My stepmom, arms still crossed, followed me, muttering, "You'll regret this, you ungrateful brat." Maybe I would, but not for the reasons she thought. As I got into my car, my father weakly asked, "Where? Will you go?" I replied quietly, "I'll manage." Her parting words echoed in my mind. "If you leave now, don't expect to ever be welcome here again." I paused for just a moment at the door, glanced back, and then walked away. My best friend's family kindly offered me a place to stay while I figured things out. I felt a mixture of sorrow and relief. Sorrow for my father, who allowed his wife to alienate me, and relief because I was no longer trapped by her controlling grip on my life. My friend wrapped me in an embrace, reminding me that she would always stand by me, just as she always had. In the following days, I scrambled to find a place of my own. My best friend reached out to a coworker who had a spare room, and by some stroke of luck, it was affordable enough for me to manage. Within a week, I had moved all my belongings out of the old house. My father was absent when I left, so my stepmom's icy glare was the only farewell I received. As I loaded my car, she hurled venomous insults at me, but I ignored her, focusing only on my fresh start. Friends who learned about the situation were shocked by my stepmom's behavior. Many of them had met my best friend and couldn't understand how anyone could call her a bad influence. Some suggested I try to reconcile with my father, but I told them it was pointless if he wasn't willing to stand up to his wife. Meanwhile, I thrived in the supportive environment provided by my best friend and her family. They never pressured me or demanded I sever ties with anyone. A small part of me hoped my father would call to apologize for letting his wife drive me away, but the call never came. Through the grapevine, I heard that my stepmom had been boasting that she had cleaned house and rid herself of the toxic presence. Ironically, her actions had only revealed who the real toxic presence was, and my father allowed her to rewrite the narrative, telling relatives whatever suited her version of events. I left them all for a friend. Some relatives, puzzled by rumors that I had abandoned my family for a rebellious friend, reached out. I simply explained that my stepmom had demanded I cut ties with a lifelong friend, so I chose to stay loyal to her. Most of them shook their heads in disbelief, but stood by me once they heard the full story. One day, my father sent me a brief message. "Hope you're okay. Let's meet." A part of me felt a glimmer of hope, thinking maybe he had finally come to his senses. We arranged to meet for coffee in a neutral place, but the conversation offered no real resolution. He tried to speak on behalf of his wife, asking me to smooth things over. I asked if that meant allowing her to decide who I could be friends with. He shrugged, avoiding my gaze, and that spoke volumes. I gently told him that I wouldn't return to a home where my independence was constantly undermined. He left, looking conflicted, but no apology came. It was clear to me that if he wouldn't stand up for me now, nothing had changed. Over time, I built a stable life. My best friend and I grew closer, advancing in our careers and personal development. While I mourned the loss of a father figure who I had once believed would protect me, I found peace in the chosen family of supportive friends. I suspect my stepmom never imagined the consequences of her manipulative demands, but she faced them. I have no regret about my decision. She tried to make me sever a bond with the one person who had been my rock since childhood, and instead I walked away from her control. My loyalty remained with the person who had always supported me. Now, when I remember my stepmom's final glare as I walked out the door, I feel a rush of relief. It was a necessary ending of toxic ties. Sometimes you have to stand your ground and say, enough, even if it means losing a place you once considered home. Because, as I've learned, a real home is a place where people accept and support your bonds, not tear them apart for convenience.